Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the City Council committee meetings this afternoon. The first order of business is Public Works and Public Safety, and Terry Borman's the chair.
Thank you, Gene. Joining me on the committee today is Jack Weiss. He's filling in for Michael Lilliquist, who couldn't be here this afternoon, and Roxanne Murphy. We have 3 items before the committee today. The first is a bid award for the McLeod Road culvert replacement.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. This is a project that may look familiar to the council. It's a project that actually went out to bid last year. We brought the bid to council for award, and then while working with the contractor, it became apparent that we would not be able to move forward with the project due to some challenges with materials and our ability to meet permit requirements that had to do with fish window. So included in your packet is a memo from last year where we ended up rejecting all bids with the intent to go back out to bid this spring, which we've done. And I'll turn this over right now to Larry Skolton, who's the project engineer on this project.
Hello, I'm Larry Skolton with Public Works. This project will replace a deteriorating culvert with a culvert that's designed for fish passage, and that's on East McLeod Road at the Baker Creek Crossing, which is essentially 300 feet south of Telegraph. And let's see, so right in the middle of the Best Western on McLeod Road, and then right here on the corner would be the Me Mexico restaurant, so right off Telegraph near the Guide Meridian. We had 5 bids come in. The lowest responsible bidder was at $293,000 by Strimler Gravel, $293,263 by Strimler Gravel. And that's about $22,000 above the engineer's estimate, or about 6.3%. And we are recommending award.
Jack?
Move to recommend this bid award.
Okay. We have a motion before us. Any comments? Yeah, Ted.
One more matter related to this project, as you may also recall, to replace this culvert, we need to do a full road closure. This is a section of McLeod that actually is barricaded right now. You cannot drive between Meridian essentially over to James. The street is there, it's constructed, but it has a closure there that was part of a previous land use issue while this section of city was actually in the county. What we proposed last time was to open that up temporarily during construction so that folks would have access in and out. We would like to do that again, and we've reached out to all the property owners. They're very much aware of this project. They're aware of the fact that we were unable to do it last year, but that our plan would be the same, to open up McLeod during construction and close it again after construction.
Okay, good. Jack?
Assuming that road would stay open permanently, would you consider that to be a collector arterial in its definitions?
Yeah, that would seem, just I'd have to look at that, but that's generally the purpose of a collector arterial, which is to get folks out of a neighborhood area, residential area, to an arterial. So I'd have to look at that. I hadn't looked at the designation on that, but because it's closed, it's not designated that way.
Are you one
that's okay.
follow-up question, I'm sorry. Are you thinking that you'll establish a process to work with the neighborhood to see whether or not we can permanently reopen it?
We had not approached the neighborhood that way during this project, and it's certainly something we could do, potentially even through the comprehensive planning process where we're looking at connectivity, but we have not had that discussion with the neighborhood at this point. It was entirely around this particular project, and everything was associated with a temporary opening of McLeod with intent to close it again. And I would have to look at this in more detail, but when this issue came up last year, I did ask our planners what the process might be if we were to suggest fully opening this up permanently. And my recollection was that it could possibly take a hearing examiner's decision, since that the thought is that that was a hearing examiner's determination before that the street would not be open to through traffic. So we can certainly pursue that and come back with some information.
Thanks.
Okay. Anything else? Oh, Roxanne. Right.
Well, I just really wanted to thank the department for doing outreach to the residents, because a lot of times there's so much confusion about stops and starts with projects, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion, answer aye.
Aye.
Okay, we will recommend approval tonight.
Thank you.
So our second item is an update on the community paramedic pilot program.
Good afternoon. Bill Newbold, Fire Chief. This afternoon, we want to give you an update on our pilot program, Community Paramedic Pilot Program that we're doing for a 9-month study. This began at the end of last year. In October of 2014, we came before council. At that time, we had Captain Sean Ferdinand, who gave an overview of the program, its scope, and what were some of the objectives that we wanted to meet at the end of it. Today, in providing an update 3 months into the program, I wanted to share with you the experiences that our community paramedic has had out in the field. And with that, I'll introduce paramedic Rob Stevenson, who is our community paramedic out there on a 40-hour work week, Monday through Friday, establishing the relationships, making the contacts with the people in our community, and looking at capturing some of the data that we look to present to you later on in the program, more near the end of it. So with that, Captain Rob Stevenson.
Thank you. Okay, I was going to give some examples today about some of the work that I've been doing so far. Probably the biggest part of my job is connecting people with services that they need in a way that reduces their need for 911. And finding out who is out there in the community that is already providing those services, and then figuring out how to hook them up with, so I find out who they are and then be able to direct them to the patients that we see to those people has been kind of my primary goal. I have a few examples, like there's one person that had called 50 times over the last 6 years for 911 for chest discomfort. I went to talk with her, and over the last year she had called 20 times, and after talking with her, having just a good conversation about the use of 911 when it's appropriate, I honestly felt like she probably wasn't calling us quite enough based on all of her medical needs and the things that she was going through, and the amount of effort she was expending trying to get her chest discomfort to go down before she ended up calling us. So I kind of gave her the green light to continue to call us. But the funny thing is, just after having that conversation with her, she's reduced her calls to 911 significantly, and has only called 2 times since that conversation, almost, 3.5 months ago or so. So we've made some headway just by having a good, frank conversation about the use of 911, and then ultimately I feel like I didn't tell her not to call at all, but yet she has. So there's just kind of one example. Another example is there's a gal who had polio as a young person, who had an inflatable mattress that continued to deflate on her. It was guaranteed. She thought she bought the right one. She got trapped in it in a way that she was unable to even get to the phone to call 911, and called for our engine company on 3 different occasions when this would happen. She got a replacement, the company guaranteed it again, the same thing happened again, and down she was going into this awkward position between the headboard and this deflating multiple bladdered mattress that was really fancy, but she would get short of breath and had to find her way to a phone to call us. So the engine company alerted me that this was a problem, and I was able to go talk with her, and I was able to reach out to a lot of different people in the community. Ultimately, Northwest Regional Council was able to point me to the Salvation Army, which they just said, hey, it's almost Christmas time. We are ready to help you out. We'll donate a brand new queen mattress and box spring to this gal. And I went, picked it up with my own truck, got it out to her place. The Engine 4 guys came and helped me load it into her mattress area, or into her room, into her bed frame there. And she's not called us since. And she's called back and said how wonderful it was that she got this. And that's just one kind of little example of solving a 911 problem that maybe wasn't hugely chronic yet, but was certainly a problem, and definitely a problem for her. Today, I got a call from Catholic Community Services, one of the groups that knows about me through some different meetings, and I've been called by them quite a few times to help out. They have housing that they run for people that have frequently mental illness or other special needs. And so I got a call today from them asking if I could go help someone that was on the phone with one of their people, and he was about to take all of his bottles of pills. And so by going out there today, I was able to sit with him for over an hour and listen to his story. And he didn't really want to take the pills, but he didn't really like the situation he was in right then. And he's also drinking alcohol, which is a problem for him, and he knows it. He's been to treatment 15 times, and he's lined up for treatment again in just a couple days. So the solution ended up being getting him to social detox, and luckily they had an opening. So I was able to drive him over to detox today, get him in there. They received him very well, and it took a while to get him into my car. He didn't trust me at first. There were some issues, but finally it all worked out, and I got him to detox, and that also kept us from going out on a 911 call that we would have gone on. And he has a long history over many, many years of calling us. So just another one of those types of folks that hopefully by hooking up with services, we can reduce the need for our fire engines and our medic units being out of service. There is one more person I'd like to talk about. That is, well, two more. One, quickly, I was getting calls from, has cancer, and was calling 911 frequently for his pain. And it was after chemotherapy, and he'd have significant pain, and was calling us. I was able to talk to WAHA, the Whatcom Alliance for Healthcare Advancement folks. They had started seeing him, and he's never called me since. And he was, after calling 911, then he had my number, and then I got him, he was calling me multiple times a day. Then I got him to WAHA, and now he calls them, but they're working with him and straightening things out for him, and I haven't had him call me, and he hasn't called 911 since, which is a great story. There's also one more person that I've been seeing that has a long history of trying to access services but has burnt some bridges, and I think that he burnt bridges with the Veterans Association and the folks that had tried to provide housing for him before, and so he was no longer going to be able to get housing through that or through Section 8 housing. And so now he's living in a place that he is paying for himself for $300, but he's so short of breath he can't clean it, and it's full of garbage. And so through WAHA and Northwest Regional Council, it's taking a little while. It's taken almost 2 months now, but we're getting to the point where volunteers are finally kind of organized to come and help clean his place, and then they're looking for ways to get him into housing. But because he has a record of not paying, there's some issues with that. Folks do have problems. It kind of lengthens the process. But just learning all these connection points and putting people together, we've got him a primary doctor now, where he had lost his primary doctor, and we got him kind of in the right direction to get housing outside of this place. He's a pretty social guy, and I think that ultimately him being home alone is also a part of his issues, and so getting into assisted living where he wants to be would be a wonderful thing, and I think that we're working towards that. So that's just kind of a little example of what I'm working on and how I'm trying to reduce the calls for folks. I have a little snippet of a video here. I was just going to play 1 minute and 40 seconds of it, and then I'll ask for questions. I'm Rob Stevenson, paramedic with the Bellingham Fire Department. I am working on a 9-month pilot program. The project is called Community Paramedic, where we're trying to reduce the non-critical calls to 911. We have 4 medic units total in the county, and the two in the city are running about 3,100 calls per year right now. And that at around 2,500 calls each, they start to run into situations where they're not able to handle additional calls that come in. So we are needing to add another medic unit in the future to try to take up some of that additional call volume that's been coming in. And it's very expensive to add a medic unit, somewhere around $1.6 million for a 24-hour-a-day medic unit to be put into service. Medicaid understands now that it's about $7,000 per ER visit, and that if we can keep people in their home or keep people that are homeless, hook them up with services so they don't have to call 911 for a warm place to stay, for instance. Maybe we can reduce the cost of health care in our community significantly. There are statistics that say that of the calls that we go to for 911, that less than 10% of them are critical calls that need an advanced life support unit or a medic unit to go to. And so this effort is to reduce costs of health care, but also to help people get better health or better care so that they don't need to go to the emergency room. Okay. Any questions for me?
Yeah, I don't have a question. Just a comment. I'm really excited to hear what's going on, because this sounds like it's operating exactly how we had envisioned that it would, and especially to hear that the coordination already with you and case managers from WAHA, and this is exactly what we were hoping we would be hearing from this program and from that program. And yeah, I'm really excited in the directions and look forward to hearing more about it as you progress with this. This is great. Yes, Roxanne.
Well, I had a chance to see just a glimpse of your work in action when I was touring the Whatcom Homeless Service Center, and I just wanted to say how much I appreciated the care and the nurturing that I saw you exhibit when you were working with that person. And also, the Service Center really expressed their appreciation for this partnership, as do, I'm sure, so many of the nonprofits and special social services organizations that you're working with. So I just wanted to thank you, and I think we all thank you.
Dan?
I'm just wondering, of the people that you're working with, are you finding that you're working with high consumers of services or frequent users of services, or is it a lot of different individuals?
Definitely the high frequency users. I mean, that's what I'm focused on. So there are statistics that say from down south in Kent that you should try to capture people in about 2 or 3 911 calls in a month and see if you can stop these folks that stop the bad habit early. But it's difficult to identify people that quickly and then be able to act quickly enough. So it seems that I'm more focused on the people that the engine company guys are referring to me, which sometimes are maybe some of those earlier folks, but most of the time are chronic people they've been seeing for a long time. So I'm probably dealing more with the long-time people that have been using our system quite often for a period of time. Yeah, I forgot to mention that the HOT team that is going out right now and trying to, they have one person, Teresa, who's amazing, and then they're getting another person hopefully soon. That homeless team I do intend to be working with very closely and trying to help, with the homeless population too. And a lot of my interactions already have been with people that are homeless. So I think that their use of 911 is frequently related to substance abuse, mental illness, and also their homeless situation. So we're trying to connect all those people. Compass Health and Lake Whatcom Treatment are huge resources for mental health, but it's not always easy to get people to go or to get plugged in properly with those groups. So that's still a sticky kind of tough thing sometimes, is getting people to help, and do they get to help themselves? That's hard sometimes.
Any other questions, comments? Yes.
Just one comment to follow up. Thank you, Rob, for the presentation. The video that Rob showed here was just a partial segment of a video that's going to be running on BTV 10. Rob worked with Dale Netzel from our IT department and has that up and running, and following this presentation here today, that'll be scheduled on BTV 10.
Okay. And thank you for the great work so far. Look forward to hearing more good things. Okay, we have one more item before us today, and that's a work session to consider 2 ordinances. One, an ordinance regarding the failure to respond to a notice of civil infraction, and an ordinance regarding pedestrian safety areas.
Good afternoon. Tara Sundin with the Planning and Community Development Department. I'm going to provide just a little introduction and a bit of background, and then we'll turn it over to Peter. We're bringing forward today a couple of ordinances that attempt to deal with a couple of behavioral issues that we have experienced in downtown. If you recall, when Darby Cowles launched the My Downtown planning effort, we undertook a pretty significant public outreach and trying to figure out what people wanted to see downtown, ranged in all kinds of, capital projects. But another kind of common theme or thread that we heard in our outreach was some concerns about the behavior downtown, and that led to discussions about setting expectations for how our community members behave. A lot of the kind of behavior that people are uncomfortable with really is stemming from the abuse of alcohol in our downtown area, moms not being as comfortable bringing their kids downtown. And so that led to Mayor Kelly launching the Downtown Public Health and Safety Committee, which a whole number of issues, you saw two of them being mentioned today, the community paramedics and the homeless outreach team, but also this, the idea of addressing some of these common infractions that are being, really the system's been a bit abused. And so we added an action item in the City Center implementation strategy. It's under the tourism and hospitality section. And so we bring that item forward to you today in this work session. So Peter?
Yeah, Peter Raffato, City Attorney. So I will just provide an overview of these two ordinances and an overview of some of the rationale. We also have Eric Osterkamp from the police department, because a lot of this was an effort to try to get the tools to law enforcement to deal with some of the issues that Tara mentioned. And also we have Ryan Anderson, who actually did the work on some of the drafting, and the lead prosecutor. So if there's any real specific questions on that part of the process, he can answer those. Something that both of these ordinances have in common in that they are both really extensions of existing law, and I will explain that as I go along. Much of the rationale for these two ordinances are laid out in the whereas clauses, but ultimately it's to impact behavior and provide for accountability. And I would just make a note that this is a work session. It's not an introduction of these ordinances for a vote at this time. So starting with the failure to respond ordinance, which starts on page 18 of the packet. In short, this ordinance makes it a misdemeanor for an individual to respond to a civil infraction notice. So this is already part of the state law. There's an RCW that makes this a misdemeanor. But in order for the City of Bellingham to really have it be an enforcement tool, it has to be adopted into the Bellingham Municipal Code. As written in this ordinance, it only applies to certain infractions as it was prompted by really certain types of behavior. And especially those infractions related to drinking in public. The whereas clause at the bottom of page 18 provides a reference to those civil infractions that could become a misdemeanor if there's no response. There is a correction to make, but I'll just go through those. One is being present in a city park between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. The next one, where it says excessive speed and other improper use of a motor vehicle, that is not actually referenced as part of the body of the ordinance, so that should be stricken, and we'll clean that up. And then there's consuming alcohol in a public place, consuming marijuana in a public place, littering, operating a bicycle in hours of darkness without a lamp, operating a bicycle without being equipped with a brake, riding a bicycle on the sidewalk in certain designated areas, and using skateboard along streets, alleys, and sidewalks and other public places in certain designated areas. So the main thing about this is this provides an enforcement tool and makes it a misdemeanor only if there is no response to a civil infraction notice. A minimal action to respond to a civil infraction is to fill out a form and provide it to the court with one of three responses, and that's either a no contest to the infraction, contesting the infraction, or a person can can express their desire to provide mitigating circumstances. Again, only when there's been no response. Any one of those three actions will actually eliminate the possibility of a misdemeanor. This ordinance also expressly recognizes, and this is at the bottom of page 19 of your packet, it expressly recognizes the options a judge will have when imposing any sentence for a violation. And these include, in the context of a deferred sentence or a deferred prosecution, that there may be required evaluation and a treatment for alcohol, drug, or mental health problems. This is really recognizing what our municipal court judges have the option to do even without this, but it really sort of expressly recognizes that. The other thing is this ordinance will apply citywide, and it provides for an effective date on July 1, because there is that recognition that social services will be, this will be in the context of social services, and we want to make sure that there was time for all the ongoing initiatives to be up and running at that point. I'd like to talk next about the, I guess I'll ask Ryan, did I leave anything out on that one? Okay. The next one is the pedestrian safety zone ordinance. This is also an extension of an existing ordinance, or I should say this one is an extension of an existing ordinance. Primarily, or as it stands right now, the city's code prohibits persons from sitting or lying on a public sidewalk in the central business district and the Fairhaven Business District between the hours of 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. This would take that prohibition to 12 midnight. Also, it makes the downtown area somewhat larger, and I realized I provided you with a map, hopefully you have in front of you, that is helpful in understanding the difference between the current area and the enlarged area. This area was came out of several discussions between the police department and the planning department in trying to recognize where those areas are where there's increased pedestrian traffic in those later hours. So you can see there that the red line is the existing area, and this ordinance would provide for that larger area with the black dotted line. This ordinance also clarifies certain areas, or it really makes it clear that in addition to just sidewalks, it includes alleys and areas abutting buildings. That was an issue that law enforcement had identified as an issue. And this ordinance, because it's really defining that area that is of concern, both in terms of the downtown area and the Fairhaven Business District, it was appropriate to go back and cross-reference that in our code with the existing ordinance regarding bicycling on sidewalks, which is prohibited in those areas, as well as skateboarding. And so that's the main reason those two items are included, because it makes sense to have a consistent area to avoid confusion. I'd like to point out certain parts that are already part of the code. There are exemptions for certain activity. It does not prohibit sitting or lying on the sidewalk for a medical emergency due to a disability, for parades and similar events, and when sitting on a bench provided by a public agency or a budding property owner, or when sitting within a bus stop zone while waiting for transportation. Also, already part of the code is the requirement that law enforcement give a notice prior to taking any give a warning prior to taking any enforcement action. And again, the purpose is to make the pedestrian environment safe and accessible to everyone, with the goal to really impact behavior and provide for accountability. And I guess I'll leave it at that. I know that Officer Osterkamp, I think, has some additional real context for these ordinances.
Yes, Mayor.
Before Officer Eric speaks, we all call him Officer Eric now, and we have Officer Dante, and there are 2 new community police officers that got a new name adopted. So, on the 2 ordinances, they were always thought to work with the social service investments that we're making. So it's not that we necessarily expect people to be able to do this just on their own, because obviously some people probably won't be able to, which is why we delayed the implementation until the social services like the HOT team and the intensive case management have a chance to get better established. And secondly, I had someone ask me, and I just thought I'd say it out loud because it seemed to be a popular, potentially a misunderstanding, that people would get a citation if they were sitting in Maritime Heritage Park on a blanket on the grass. And that certainly isn't the intention. That would prohibit people from being in the park and sitting on the grass on a blanket. So we want to just make sure that everyone understands that it's a community-wide expectation, and it's not necessarily out there to punish people, but to give an added opportunity for the police to work with the social service people and help connect people with services and hold people accountable for all of us accountable for the kind of behavior we'd like to see in those areas.
If you can sit on a blanket in the park, what other parts of the park can't you sit in?
I don't think any other part.
I think I can answer that.
You mentioned that one, so I'm
Well, that's
curious
because
that's a big area of the new park. What park can't you sit in?
Yeah.
Yeah, these ordinances don't.
And you get arrested for it?
These ordinances don't impact sitting or lying anywhere in a park.
Okay. Okay, I was just wondering, because that one was brought up, so was there some other ones where it was
The
illegal?
only reason that was brought up is because someone asked me about it yesterday and said there were a
Okay.
lot of people that were asking that question, so I thought I'd answer it.
Jack?
With or without a blanket, right?
If they don't want a blanket, they don't have to have a
Okay.
blanket.
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure.
Thank you, Mayor. Council members, as you know, I'm Officer Eric. I've been with the Bellingham Police for a while now. Part of my primary duties have been working in the downtown area, but I've also worked throughout the city, obviously. During my time with Bellingham PD, part of that was 2 years in the Bike Patrol unit. As most of you guys know, that the Bike Patrol unit is a unit that actually goes downtown primarily and then focuses on going down there, contacting citizens, dealing with calls, contacting businesses, making sure that we are very approachable by all the residents that are around down there and also with the businesses and everyone else that are in that area and be able to respond to that. I did that for 2 years, so obviously I had a lot of conversations with different groups. Part of that included also going to neighborhood associations, going to business associations, talking to 911 complainants, and also going out and just going to any community meetings and talking with those people. Over the years, I started to notice a trend that was occurring in the conversations that I was having with these groups. They wanted to know why the offenders that were out there drinking in public or the individuals that were laying down on the sidewalk were not being held accountable for their actions. I had to explain to them that we didn't have a code in place that would appropriately address those issues at the time. And to illustrate what I'm talking about here, I wanted to share 3 stories of 3 real events that occurred that I had to respond to in the last 3 years downtown. The first one is a mom and her 12-year-old son. They were downtown at the Mount Baker Theater at a nighttime performance. After the performance, they decided that they wanted to head into further downtown to go and have dessert. As they were heading down there to go to dessert, they were walking on the sidewalk, and they came upon a group of people. A group of people were standing and sitting down. Some were drinking beer. And as they walked past there, one of them made a lewd comment toward her. She heard her son pass them, and about a block later encountered me on my bike. When she encountered me, I was dealing with something else, so she patiently waited, and she explained to me about what had just occurred. She had said that she comes down quite often and runs into these type of events on a regular basis. And she asked, what can we do about it? What is the solution to this? And I explained to her at the time that with the sitting and lying law ending at 9 p.m., and it was after that time during this time, there was nothing I could do to prevent that, so that they had to skirt around them. There was also the drinking, the way she described some of the people, they were familiar to me, and I knew that the drinking ticket, the drinking in public ticket, was probably not going to be an effective tool because I've already written these people for those exact same citations. She wasn't happy, but she went on her way. Another story, I was on Railroad near the WT area, and there was a group of about 15 or 20 people who were walking down the sidewalk. This was at nighttime again. And I was watching them, and as I'm watching them, I hear two males start to argue. As they were arguing, I start biking that direction, and I come upon two men who are arguing. During that time, I find out that one is one of the parents, and that this whole group had just come from a Bellingham High School game, and were coming downtown to get some food. As they're going down to get some food, as they're walking down the sidewalk, there's an individual that was sitting on the sidewalk, had his feet out in front of him. Well, if anyone's ever walked on that sidewalk there, you know how narrow it is. So some of the family members and people had to actually go around into the parking area and then back onto the sidewalk. The father had asked that they move along and push aside so that they could actually walk past there. This started an argument, then I showed up. He asked about what we could do about that. I explained to him that it was after 9 p.m., that since he's only taking up half the sidewalk and one person can still make movement around there, that I couldn't actually cite him for this. Obviously, he was angry about this because he thought the safety of his family and the people that were there was something that should be more important than someone having their feet sticking out into the sidewalk. The next one came to me from a meeting that I was at, and an ADA representative, American Disabilities Act representative, came up to me and said that she works with several of the senior centers and also retirement homes in the downtown area. While she's been there, she said that many of these seniors down there actually have stopped going out, especially later in the evening on their walks, because they feel with the drinking downtown and people lounging on the sidewalk, it was not a comfortable environment. One of the things she told me about was a specific story about a family who used to drive up to get their grandmother who had a walker. And they would always bring her about 2.5 blocks away and to go and get coffee. It's something they did every Sunday. So as they were heading out there, several times on these type of walks, they would actually have to help their grandmother work around these groups, kind of like the same with the basketball group there. The grandma started to feel fairly embarrassed about this, and so she asked them to stop coming and doing that. Now these stories, although they may seem like singular events, these are regularly occurring events. And I know this from having spent a lot of time downtown. And they represent hundreds of conversations that I've had with these groups while working on a street, attending neighborhood meetings, downtown partnership meetings, and also when responding to calls. While talking with these concerned citizens, I would explain to them that I have written some of these habitual offenders dozens of drinking in public tickets, only to have them throw them away, tear the tickets up, actually roll a cigarette in them and smoke them in front of me, or just laugh and tell me to throw them in the trash. All because there's no accountability for the way the code is currently written. I've also had to listen to many upset citizens that want to know why one person can lay down, take up half of a sidewalk, thus creating a hazard for those who are trying to have to skirt around them. And this comes to people who have wheelchairs, who have walkers, who are otherwise mobily impaired, and are attempting just to go down a sidewalk. But a person laying on a sidewalk during business hours, when there are businesses open downtown, aren't able to even get past them, or they have to somehow change their behavior to be able to get around those people, sometimes creating safety issues with that. Like me, these citizens want a solution to these issues, and they want to make sure that all the residents of Bellingham can safely enjoy what we have to offer. I just want to leave you with one last story that occurred with my fellow bike officer, John Knutson. We contacted a person who we contacted many times downtown, mostly for drinking in public. As John was writing her ticket for drinking in public, she began laughing and asked, "Why are you even bothering to write that ticket? You know I'll just throw it away." She went on to say, "How about this? You give me your ticket book, and every time I open a beer, I'll write myself a ticket." Now, that gave her a pretty big laugh. But for me, however, it was demoralizing, because as an officer, knowing that a law I'm supposed to enforce was not only ineffective, but futile in ability to curb an offender's actions, it was very demoralizing. Like the rest of my fellow officers, we work to find solutions by going out and building partnerships with social organizations, with citizens, with other city departments, and other local organizations that support our community. These proposed changes in codes were born out of those partnerships and suggestions from a variety of citizens, from city employees, social organizations, and even from the people that I have written these tickets to. It is our best attempt to try and ensure that the people who act outside the legal code of this city are held responsible for their actions, and also to work towards the best interest of our community. Thank you.
Yes, Jack.
So I really appreciate the approach that you're taking. I think that it will be a better step for the downtown area as far as people that want to actively use the downtown in a safe and productive way. I want to remind, and I've had this conversation with Peter and others in the city, that well before the formation of the Downtown Community Solutions Group, that the council had discussed this issue at length and actually had a unanimous vote. And it had to do with complaints that I was receiving from the Birchwood neighborhood, as well as my own stories of seeing issues associated in the Birchwood area, where the stories that you shared were similar in the Birchwood neighborhood too, where single parents with strollers couldn't get through a sidewalk, and we're talking about much narrower sidewalks there than there are in the city, in the downtown area, because people were lying down or just simply blocking it, or in one instance they actually had chairs that they were blocking the sidewalk with chairs. And we brought that forward to the council, and the council, not to focus on the Birchwood neighborhood, but they basically said that we asked the staff to go and look at this citywide to identify other areas outside of the downtown. Fairhaven, I'm not quite sure why Fairhaven is in there. I didn't hear any stories about Fairhaven. I'm sure that there probably are, but I guess the issue that I look at is Fairhaven as much of an issue as other areas such as Birchwood or Barclay or Samish or other areas where we might have some problems. I understand that this was really focused on the downtown because we had a downtown community solutions group, and that was really where our attention was. But I was hoping through this exercise and through what we were doing, and also through the fact that the council requested this review and discussion and come back, that we would look at the other areas of the city to find out, do we have problems elsewhere, and to I guess to discuss this with the police, because the complaints that I was receiving from the neighbors were that the neighbors would call the police would come down, and this is in the middle of the day. This isn't after 9 o'clock. This is in the middle of the day, where the police are saying, my hands are tied. I can't get these people to move because we don't have an ordinance for that particular area. If it happened in the downtown area, sure, something could happen, but not for elsewhere. And I don't know. I just, if this is a work session, I would like to request that we look at this in a much more comprehensive way citywide to see, are there other areas that should be reflected. And the one thing that I guess just because it was just handed out to us is the map that's up there. Is this the same? Is the black line? Is that the same lines of the downtown? Okay, because that was one of the things that I think we were trying to do, is to minimize the number of districts and boundaries and to try and make things fairly similar. And so to me, it seems like, would it be better to go and just simply use the downtown boundaries as our pedestrian safety zone instead of creating a brand new one? Because I see, you know, sitting on Rose Street or on Berry Street, you know, is that really as much of an issue as sitting on, you know, on Birchwood Street? So I don't know. I'm just throwing these things out to you and interested in what your comments are.
It is a work session, and that's what we want to hear. We want to hear other concerns that you might have. So that's great.
Roxanne?
Jack, I'm really glad you brought that up, because these were the thoughts on my mind too, because I know that when we strengthen law enforcement in one area, sometimes it adversely affects our neighborhoods. So I'm really interested in that. But also, at the same time, I really want to show the support for what Officer Eric and what Officer Dante are doing. I think Birchwood is a great example of how community organizing in partnership with the police department can really help solve some of these problems that the neighborhoods are dealing with. So that's why I'm really glad we have that program going on in case some of the issues get moved to our neighborhoods.
Got some questions, but Dan, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. I know that there's been consideration given in delaying the implementation of these ordinances, specifically the sitting and lying, to allow for other services to work through. That includes the mental health court, the homeless outreach team, the community paramedicine program. I believe there's an alcohol impact area in there as well. I'm just wondering if, you know, the community paramedicine program is just 3 months old. The homeless outreach team was just formed in December. The mental health court is new. I'm wondering if 6 months is enough time to allow for those programs to work through, because this issue is very complex. And what we're talking about is addressing a symptom of a larger social issue here. So I'm just wondering if it would be possible to further delay implementation of the sitting and lying ordinance.
Mayor?
And I guess what I'd say is the one service that we're also supporting that I think Terry added to the budget this year was the intensive case management through WAHA. And they are focusing on those individuals that are most frequently calling for help and most frequently need help. And hopefully that would be a very large percentage of the people that we'd be looking at, people we already know with potentially services that are already available for them. But that's definitely up to the council to determine. We had, you know, there had been a request to do it right away, and we didn't think that we would be able to implement very well if we didn't have everything, both the social service side and the enforcement side, moving forward together. But you guys discuss what you think.
One of the biggest issues I have is the misdemeanor element. I understand when you talk about those extreme cases, but there's a lot of people that can get caught up and will get caught up in this and have a misdemeanor charges, which carries on their record, get caught in the system, on probation. I look at this, I see particularly young people getting caught up in this, and yes, they should pay their fines right away, but a lot of teens are stupid. Sorry, they act that way. And they don't follow through. I've worked with them all my life. And I see what happens when they get caught. Somebody riding a skateboard, not having light on their bike, not paying this, responding, getting caught up in a misdemeanor, getting put in the legal system. Once you're on probation, I'm sorry, the chances of getting out of that without incurring a whole lot of other costs, a whole lot of other things for especially poor young people is, I mean, it's terrible getting it. And I worked in the system and we try, but it's really tough when you're, you know, in that spotlight. And there are going to be a lot of people caught up in and can be caught up in this. And if we say, well, officers will have discretion over which ones we got a problem. As soon as we say officers have discretion over which or who we're going to charge, having been in the system for a long time, I know who ends up getting charged and who will, say, run along, because it's just the way our institutions work. If we put something in here, perhaps, that if somebody has X amount of these kinds of things, then I can maybe go along with it. But with this, on one charges, people can get misdemeanors. Trying to get housing, when you got a misdemeanor charge on it and they run it, you're blanked from that. This, you know, I understand the reason, and I understand because when you tell the stories of the extreme ones, of course, let's do this. But most of the things that happen aren't the extreme ones. They're people that get caught up in these things, and I've got some problems with it. So, as it's written, I definitely can't support it. And as written, I definitely want to see anything go before a public hearing on it, because I think there's going to be a lot of other people in the community that will also maybe have some concerns about who gets caught. You know, we're not going to do parking infractions and that kind of stuff, but that's a detriment down there. But that goes to other people. You know, why shouldn't we, those that don't, if we're going to do this, why shouldn't everyone that doesn't show up for court for their parking infraction also get a misdemeanor? Let's treat people equally here, not just set it up so that we're going after specific segments of population. Let's make it a fair law. I know we're targeting for downtown, but some of these really target specific segments of our population, youth, other kinds of things, and I've got concerns the way that is administered. So just, you know, when we're drafting this before it goes out, I hope those kind of things are looked at. Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, those are excellent things for further discussion. The one thing, or a couple things, Councilmember Weiss on the map not lining up exactly with the planning documents. One of the things it kind of relates to your first point about, now we're talking about the sitting line going into other areas of the city. We felt that for this ordinance to go forward, it should really be narrowly tailored to something that has that dense pedestrian, the dense pedestrian activity. And so that was the request of the legal department, to make sure that we're consistent with cases on this, to make sure that and so that's why it became smaller than what the downtown planning document would have suggested. So that's one thing. The other thing to keep in mind is that the failure to respond ordinance is a citywide ordinance. So in terms of that being a tool for law enforcement, that would be available citywide. And the thing to keep in mind with the failure to respond ordinance is, and it doesn't require, failure to pay a fine does not factor into it, and not appearing for court does not factor into it. It is simply filling in, checking the box, and sending that into the court. So it's a pretty minimum level of accountability that we're talking about. But I just wanted to clarify those items.
Roxanne and then Jack.
Well, one of the concerns that I've heard from community members is that with the sitting and lying, that we'll be using this to really target homeless people and disrespect homeless people. Could you generally address that concern?
I'll take that one. Well, that's why when we talked about all the issues and what we could implement first, the easiest, we talked about a suite of things, and the council was extremely responsive and voted to add a lot of resources to the social service needs that we have in conjunction with this. And when we looked at all the recommendations, I made a commitment that we would look at all of them, not just part of them. And so that was these two and the alcohol, what's it called? Impact area were the three that were more on the enforcement side, and all the other recommendations we had out of the 14 were the social service side. So I expect it to work together. It won't work if there isn't, aren't the resources or the places or the connections for people to go. But we're trying to be very clear that regardless of who is doing the behaviors, we're talking about community expectations and not just for one separate group of people. So it would be important, I think, that we move everything together. So we have a few more tools, but we have a few more resources to respond. Well, actually more than a few more. We have a lot of new resources to respond. So I guess that's what I'd say, is it's not one-sided.
Jack?
So I want to pick up on Terry's excellent point about the issue about parking infractions, parking scofflaws, and how that relates to something like this, because it seems like it would be the same. And if we're dealing with bicycles as moving vehicles and really targeting bicycles in this, in this ordinance, another form of transportation is cars. And why aren't we dealing with cars as well in the same, same apples to apples enforcement?
A parking infraction is different than a civil infraction, and that's the reason. It's just like a misdemeanor is different than a civil infraction. So parking tickets, we only derive our authority and have the maximum ability based on what in RCW, what the state law, if it prohibits us from going further. So for instance, drinking in public is a civil infraction. That's designated by an RCW. Now to enforce that in the city, we either need to adopt that RCW by reference or we need to create our own. But what we can't do is create drinking in public and then make it a misdemeanor. We can't make the penalty higher than what the state law has already regulated, which is why drinking in public in state law is a civil infraction. We can't elevate that to a higher offense and make therefore the accountability. Now as it relates, that then is a different subset. Civil infraction is different than a parking ticket. It doesn't go on your record. A parking infraction has its own subset. It's basically, kind of down the line of felonies, misdemeanors, civil infraction, parking tickets. So parking tickets are not covered by where we're deriving this authority, which goes back to the RCW. They're not covered in that particular law, and they're not considered of the same character or same consequence as a civil infraction. So they're just of different sorts.
Okay, follow up. Okay, I understand the parking part of it. But if car does not have a tail light and it goes out and you get a civil infraction for that,
correct.
Is that going to be treated the same thing as a bicycle not having a light on it at night? So
there's a couple things. First of all, the RCW, which I can give you, is 780-080. That is a failure to respond. And the state law covers every civil infraction, which would include moving violations, every single civil infraction you could basically think of under the state law. And what we're proposing is to not adopt that just by reference, which some cities have done. City of Seattle has just adopted that by reference, and they have the authority to cite you for a misdemeanor for any type of infraction that if you fail to respond to that ticket. I think what we proposed is to tailor that to more offenses that are, addressing the topic that I think that we're being asked to, which is looking at some of the behaviors that affect, the community downtown. But certainly, it can be written differently and can be just like the state law, again, because we are just confined by the state law, and the state law is wide open. It allows every single civil infraction to be potentially charged as a misdemeanor if the person fails to respond to it. So the answer to that is yes, we do have the authority to do that. The question is, should we do that, or do we want to do that?
Okay, and just one last follow-up on that. I'll just continue using the bicycle, but we can talk about anything. Bicycle light not on at night. If the infraction is written within the pedestrian safety zone, that's when the misdemeanor thing happens, or can you be up in Cordata and get hit for a bike light and then be susceptible to the misdemeanor?
So it does not matter where you receive the infraction as to that code. That code is anywhere in the city limits that you receive that infraction. If you fail to respond to that infraction, whether you're in the Cordata or you're downtown, okay, that code kicks in. So that is not limited to downtown.
Okay, you lost me then.
Yeah. Gene and then Dan.
Just it's a great discussion, but we're already 10 minutes overdue. And I just want to remind everybody we have a 4 o'clock celebration here at City Hall, so I would assume we could wrap this up rather quickly. I know it's a great discussion, but I'm the bearer of bad news, so we need to move on. I'm just...
Dan?
Just wondering, pursuant to item F in the sitting and lying, how that diversion is triggered? What's the what triggers the court to exercise its authority for that item, items 1 through 4?
Well, I guess, yeah, I can speak to that too. So I think, as Peter stated, that's really just expressly stating what our courts already have the authority to do. It's dependent on a variety of circumstances, just like any recommendation that the prosecutor makes whenever there's a case that's resolved. We look at the person's criminal history, in mitigating and facts in the case, as well as, exacerbating facts of the case. The court always has the authority to override our recommendation. It's kind of one of those things that it'd be very case specific, but any case could absolutely fall within that category of needing to diverting the person to mental health court, or maybe it's some type of probation services with the mental health services that we can, direct them towards. But again, to know what type of case it's going to, that we would recommend that on, or the court would order that on, would be very case specific. But the authority to do so is available in every case. But it's really a situation of, is the person amenable to it? What does their history look like? Those sorts of things. And ultimately, a lot of times it also depends what the defendant's willing to do. A lot of times we have people that, if they know their sentence is short and they'll get out of jail, they'd rather just do that and resolve it and not sort of take a longer, approach to doing mental health court for the next 2 years if they only have to serve 5 days. There's a lot of factors into that, but the tool is available in every case.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Just want to throw one last thing out, Gene, and then I'll wrap it up. And that's kind of related to Jack's thing about cars and bikes being treated differently. The only time I have ever felt endangered in the downtown, and it's happened many times, and that's trying to walk through a crosswalk in this downtown, and cars not obeying the crosswalk laws and coming through. That endangers pedestrians in the downtown. We don't seem to, enforce those a whole lot, or we don't have it. It doesn't happen a lot. But with those kind of things, should definitely, those kind of car incidents, speeding in the downtown, if you're going to just pick a location, speeding through the downtown, running red lights in the downtown, going through crosswalks, why are we going to just pick on people on skateboards or bikes? I know it's a different class of citizen, but I'm just throwing it out there as we look at bringing this forward for further discussion. Jack.
And, another thing that I think to consider too is just the width of sidewalks when sidewalk cafes are installed. We take up a lot of real estate on the sidewalks. And we do it for reasons, but at the same time, it has unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Well, and we are reviewing that too. I just want to leave one thing, not let it sit there. We are not focusing on classes of people. We're focusing on behavior. And I agree, Terry, that it could be construed that way, but it wasn't anyone's intent to do that, to do that.
But we have those unintended consequences.
That's
in
right,
so
but I
much of
didn't-
our legal system where certain classes end up being targeted, and it's
Okay. Well, just so you wonder what my motivation or our motivation is, it's not on any class
no,
of
but
people.
and it's my job to point out those things, that it does have those unintended consequences. And
Well,
yeah.
I felt like you were saying that's why we did this, and I
No,
just want you to
I'm
know
just
it's
saying
not.
this is what happens. Yeah, okay. So, I don't know what happens next with this, but I imagine we'll have another work session on it. I would say that seems likely. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
So that's the end
Okay.
of committee. And
Thank you,
Gene,
Terry.
I'll turn it over to you.
How long do we